From whacking his racket into the net at the Swiss indoors to getting dragged into a cricket war between Pakistan and India, these are the most controversial moments of Roger Federer's career. Back in 2017, in Basel, Switzerland, the Swiss maestro was chasing another title when he came up in the final against Juan Martín del Potro. It wasn't going to be an easy match, and it didn't take long for the Argentinian to get under Roger's skin. After losing the first set, the Fed Express was in a tight spot in the second when he hit a bad volley, losing the point. What happened next was something the Basel crowd had never seen before. Federer vented his frustration by smashing his racket into the net, which the BBC called a rare show of emotion. But I'm sure you'll think differently by the end of this video, cause who can forget the time he told Novak Djokovic's camp to shut up. Federer's rivalry with Novak wasn't as friendly as the one with Rafael Nadal, and like Del Potro, the Serbian had a way of enraging his Swiss counterpart. One time, at the scenic Monte Carlo Masters, a tournament that Roger always found really hard to win games, he was feeling the pressure against Novak. After one of Novak's shot went long, Federer looked up to the Serbs' camp and told them to be quiet. Remember, this was a tense time for the Fed and Novak. Their rivalry was heating up back then, and a lot of comments were made by both camps in the build-up to their matches. It was obvious the Novak camp was trying to get Federer off his game. But that's not the only time he's made his feelings known to the crowd. Something similar happened at the French Open in 2012. Any guesses who he was playing in that game? Anyone? Anyone? You guessed it, Del Potro once again. After an impressive rally between the two, Federer couldn't match the ferocity of Del Pot's forehand, and it was infuriating. He'd already lost the first set, and after losing that point, he turned to the crowd and yelled, "Shut up." It was audible enough for the TV cameras to pick up on it, and John McEnroe, who's no stranger to on-court rage, claimed it was the angriest he'd ever seen the maestro. Once again, though, Roger recovered from the first set loss and booked a place in the semis. While these moments are rare later in Federer's career, he was very bratty while growing up. And that's according to Nike's former director of tennis, Mike Nakajima. In fact, it's a very commonly known tidbit about Federer. Did you know that he took anger management lessons as a teenager? Yeah, I know. It's so hard to imagine the maestro we've admired for so long for his model attitude being something of a brat. Nakajima explained how he'd seen Federer break rackets for fun, and even compared him to Marat Safin, back when both of them were playing in the junior circuit. Surprisingly, Mike claims that the turning point for the Swiss was a match against Safin. But it was after the match, when Federer saw the highlights, that he realized he was throwing tantrum after tantrum. Turns out, the Fed Express was embarrassed with himself and vowed to never do it again. To be honest, it did work, cause it took him nearly 8 years to break his next racket, in a controversial moment at the Miami Masters semifinal back in 2009. Federer was getting schooled by a young Novak, and despite winning the first set, he was no match for the level of tennis the Serb was putting on display, and he ended up losing the match. Roger smashed his racket to smithereens, threw the mangled remains at his stool, and the best part was when he was booed by the crowd. Come to think of it, it might be the only time I ever saw Roger get booed. He was so furious by the time the match ended that he refused to shake hands with the chair. But it was hardly the only time he ever got mad at a chair umpire. And I'll never forget his outburst at the 2009 US Open final. To be fair to Federer, it was one of the toughest losses of his career. Not only because it was at the hands of Del Potro, but because of how much was on the line that year. Chair umpire Jack Garner wasn't making things easy for Roger, and the Fed finally snapped. At a changeover, Roger argued with the umpire, telling Jack how he wasn't allowed to challenge if he waited 2 seconds. But Del Potro was allowed to wait nearly 10 seconds to make a challenge. At one point, he also told Garner not to show him his hand, and that he'll talk whenever he wants to talk. When Roger's rant was over, Garner tried explaining something to him, and Federer said, "Don't talk to me." This reminds me of another unruly incident from the King of Wimbledon. The time he couldn't believe the ball was actually in. In Roger's matches at Wimbledon, Rafael always seemed to have an edge on him, and in the 2007 final, Federer lost a tough point and refused to accept the decision. The shot was originally called out by a lineman, but Rafa challenged the call, and on a replay, it showed that the ball caught the line by the faintest of margins. In the heat of the moment, Roger couldn't believe what was happening, and was more than happy to let the umpire know what he thought about the call, asking, "How in the world was that ball in?" Well, you can't have everything your way, Raj. But he did win the final. While Rafa's reaction may have been unjustified, one of his earlier spats with Rafa was perfectly valid. At the 2006 Italian Open against Nadal, Federer lost his focus and went on to lose an iconic match. And the ATP claims that particular game made the Federer rivalry what it is today as well. The reaction to the game was just as interesting though. During the match, Federer yelled at Rafa's uncle, Tony Nadal, and accused him of coaching his nephew. As you all know, that's illegal in tennis, and Federer was incensed from that moment onwards, addressing the allegation in the post-match interview. And Rafa's response wasn't kind either. He told the media that the world number one should learn to be a gentleman even when he loses. As you can see, Federer's been great at maintaining his picture-perfect PR, but his mask has slipped on occasion, like the time he was criticized by British sports reporter Catherine Whitaker for his controversial comments on a domestic abuse case. Unfortunately, like many other sports, there's been plenty of domestic abuse cases in tennis as well. One of the recent ones involved Alexander Zverev, who was accused of domestic abuse by his ex-partner Olya Sharapova. When Federer was asked for his opinion on the case, he sidestepped the question, saying it was a really private case and that he wasn't comfortable talking about it. But Whitaker wasn't having any of it, claiming she was super disappointed in Federer and how even though there are uncomfortable issues in life, it doesn't mean we ignore them. She expected better from someone who has such a huge fan base. But criticism from a sports reporter is one thing. Imagine having an entire nation fuming in your comment section. That's what happened with Federer in 2015, when he posted a picture holding Team India's jersey with the hashtag #BleedBlue. Given his star power, Federer's fans in Pakistan weren't too thrilled with his decision to support Team India, and they called him out in the comment section. I mean, he has the right to support whichever team he wants, but cricket tends to be an extremely emotional affair. Federer understood that it was better to steer clear of the entire fiasco, and later apologized in a post, saying it was only done because Nike asked him to do it. So, from getting dragged into a cricket war between Pakistan and India to whacking his racket into the net at the Swiss indoors, those were the most controversial moments of Roger Federer's career.